The County Seat is brought to you this week by Jones & DeMille Engineering, helping to shape your quality of life. Find out more at jonesandemille.com.
Welcome to the County Seat. I'm Sean Mill, filling in for Chad Booth. You know, no one's above the law, except for government. No, really, sometimes and in some cases, government entities can be above having to pay out really expensive lawsuit judgments. Called government immunity, that's the topic of today's program. And for the answer of what government immunity is and why it's necessary, we turn to Derek Dowsett.
Governmental immunity dates back to 13th century English law, where the sovereign, or king, was shielded from litigation. Primary reasoning for this was thought to be that it'd be ridiculous or even absurd for a king to be found guilty in his own court. Prior to that, those that complained against the king, well, they were probably his next victim. Before 1946, all governments in the U.S. enjoyed governmental immunity. The federal government still enjoys that immunity, meaning that it cannot be brought to court except for specific cases, such as when a government employee causes damages or in claims in which the government is a party in a contract. Governmental immunity of states is a different matter and is codified in the 11th Amendment of the Constitution. Under 11th Amendment protection, Utah enjoyed common law protection until 1965, when the Utah Governmental Immunity Act was passed. The act codified immunity granted to governmental entities engaged in governmental functions. But wait, what does that mean? To clarify this ambiguity, Utah has employed a governmental versus proprietary test, which considers the following three things. A function must be something done or furnished for the general public that is of public or governmental character. Is there a special pecuniary benefit or profit to the state? Is the activity of such nature as to be in real competition with free enterprise? This test has been criticized in other states because it has yielded unpredictable and contradictory results. For example, operation of a municipal waterworks has been ruled proprietary, while the operation of a municipal sewer has been ruled governmental. So, in 1987, the state of Utah decided to rework the Governmental Immunity Act by expanding the definition of governmental function to include all governmental acts. Basically, because of the 1987 Governmental Immunity Act, any state government entity and employee are immune from lawsuits for any injury that results from the exercise of a governmental function, with a few specific exceptions. Currently, there is a three-pronged test to determine if a government employee is entitled to statutory immunity. First, whether the activity performed is a governmental function and therefore immunized from suit. Second, whether the act waives immunity given the particular circumstances. And third, if the immunity has been waived, whether there is an exception to that waiver, which results in a retention of immunity. The Act does waive immunity in areas such as contract obligation, property, defective public buildings and improvements, negligent acts and omissions of public employees, and injuries resulting from sexual battery against public school students. If it is decided that a suit can go forward, there are limitations set regarding how much damages a party can claim. This is referred to as a tort cap. Every even-numbered year, the state risk manager makes rules that establish the limitations of the caps. Currently, those caps are set at approximately $780,000 per person, $3 million per occurrence, and $300,000 for property damage. Punitive damages may be awarded in addition at the discretion of the court. So now you have the basics on governmental immunity in Utah. For the County Seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Thanks, Derek. When we return, we'll turn to our panel of experts and review what communities do to protect themselves with government immunity. You're watching the County Seat. Well, welcome back. Again, thanks for joining us here on the County Seat. Today's topic is government immunity and liability caps. We're joined today by a panel of experts. We have Stan Summers, Box Elder County Commissioner and the current president of the Utah Association of Counties, Darcy Goddard, the Chief Policy Advisor for the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office, and Craig Hale, General Counsel of Utah Local Governments Trust. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Craig, why don't we begin with you? Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what governmental insurance products look like? Most of us are, of course, insured in one way or another and comfortable with what we know, but what does it mean for government units?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things at issue here as part of this discussion, and the broader topic of this, of course, is governmental immunity, and what that means is essentially whether a governmental entity can be sued. And there are laws dating back to the 12th century granting governmental immunity to, well, really sovereign immunity to the king that have essentially carried their way forward through the centuries to where we are today. And today the concept is that, there's a balancing act between being able to deliver governmental services at a consistent rate and keeping taxes low versus allowing individuals and entities to file claims and recover against the government. And this is admittedly a bit of a high wire act to walk. Governmental entities, just like most private entities, do have the ability to acquire insurance. Everything from workers' compensation insurance, which is required, to liability insurance, property insurance, marine insurance, pretty much everything that you would see in the private arena. But when it comes to the public, it's a little bit, public entities, it's a little bit different because there are very different risks that public entities face as opposed to the private market. And so this discussion is a very important discussion to have because it not only affects every governmental entity in the state and in the country, but every individual, because at the end of the day, we are all the people who fund the government, and whatever expenses the government has, whether it's to pay for insurance or self-insurance or to pay these claims that are happening, it affects every single one of us.
Thank you. So Darcy, you have some experience from this. Is there something that you might be able to add about where there's an appropriateness for coming and filing a suit in this kind of situation against a governmental entity?
Well, I think we can all agree that the concept of insurance for public entities or the governmental immunities doesn't mean that the government is never liable when something happens. I mean, we all understand that government needs to be responsible and responsible to its constituents. That said, there are certain things, and I think that Craig alluded to this, that government does because it has to do them, and they can be inherently fraught with risk. So, for example, a private company can make a decision whether it wants to open a park or run a swimming pool or a jail. And that's a decision they can make. That's not a decision that government can just decide not to do. And yet all of those things are inherently risky. And so recognizing that there are unique aspects of government service that result in unique liabilities means that it's very important to talk about issues of insurance and immunity and limitations and the ability to plan for events, keeping in mind that taxpayer dollars are funding all of it.
Great primer. Thank you very much for that background and context. You're watching The County Seat. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Please stay tuned. Thanks for joining us. Again, today we're covering governmental immunity and liability caps. So, Darcy, give us a bit of a summary of the different perspectives that counties and cities, governmental units have to consider in this marketplace.
Well, it's a really interesting policy discussion, and it's a very delicate weighing of interests. And is something that probably every citizen should care about. There are different approaches to governmental liability across the country. In some states, they have no liability cap. You can sue the government and the damages are unlimited, except they have made it so that the government is immune from almost all claims. In other states, they have very weak immunities for government. So you can, in fact, successfully sue them for things, but the caps are really, really low. Utah has taken a more balanced approach, I would argue, and certainly I think the legislature would argue. They have sort of set up a system where there are reasonable sort of middle ground immunities, but also tort caps that are at sort of the middle to high end compared to our sister states across the country. And that sort of allows the government to balance its interest in public safety and making sure that all of our employees are being as careful as humanly possible. But when mistakes happen, as they do, there is a possibility for financial remuneration to the individual that is not so high that it would bankrupt a county or a city. Utah also has a very unique system in place where if you have a truly extraordinary claim, a school bus full of children, for example, that get injured due to the negligence of a governmental employee, there's a procedure in place where the person can go directly to the legislature to get funds above the cap. So Utah has really taken a very thoughtful and balanced approach to this over the years, and has kept an eye on the limits of what the cap should be and again, what that appropriate balance is for the various forms of government.
Great and good approach. Thank you. So Craig, we're starting to sound like attorneys already, right? We're talking about sovereignty and we're talking about tort. What does all of that mean to local government units?
Well, kind of where the rubber hits the road is, as with most things, it comes down to dollars, right? We've seen over the years governmental immunity and tort caps increase, and we've seen them be eroded by court cases. And one can understand why that happens. You get a very sympathetic case where you have a real tragedy, and courts struggle with, limiting awards to somebody who's been severely damaged. And so you see this constant battle between the legislature and the courts to try and rein this in. But it ultimately matters because these are costs that are borne by every citizen of your county, of your state, of your local government. And so governmental entities have got to protect themselves in a number of ways. One is trying to hold our legislature accountable and keep these caps in check. But the other is to do, as we talked about initially, what private entities do as well, is provide some means for covering the risks that we are exposed to. And there are a number of different ways governmental entities do that. Some participate in what are called risk pools. There are some 90,000 governmental entities across the United States, and I believe about 85 to 90% of them participate in pools. And that's basically governmental entities coming together to share the risk, to spread the risk out among themselves. And Utah has two, USIP and the Utah Local Governments Trust, that do a great job of providing those. Other governmental entities will look to the private market, so private insurers, and then other governmental entities, if they're large enough, will bear most of that risk themselves, at least up to a certain level, and self-insure, if you will. In every one of these cases, though, reinsurance is typically involved. And this, I won't get too technical on you, but essentially, most governmental entities cannot handle a hit that would exceed several $1 million, but they can take care of, or a pool can take care of, the smaller hits. And so they have to go out to the reinsurance market to get additional coverage for those large potential claims. And what's going on across the country right now has broad implications for that, just in terms of what the limits of those insurance are and how large the claims are starting to be.
Explain to us and the viewers at home Why all of the things we've discussed so far? Now, how does that hit home?
Well, from being a business owner to a homeowner to a taxpayer, I think you have to understand and realize that that's where the premiums come. It's just not the government all of a sudden grows money. I mean, the only income that most governments have is taxation. So when taxation happens, that happens to everybody. And so when we start talking about tort caps and immunities and all these other things, it's because basically they're trying to save your own money from having to pay out to other individuals. We come from an area that was hard pressed with having a lot of things happen for a while before I was a commissioner. And so basically, if it wouldn't have been for a pool, we would have probably been uninsured because of those things. And now that we've taken steps to help in those areas, there are certain things that, so now our addition from taxpayers' money to some of these pools have actually lessened because of the things that we've done, to lessen that. And it's the same way you do with your house or your business, or, you slip and falls, you go out and put a handrail in, you go do different things to try to lessen your liability in these areas. So, one of the things I can think off the top of my head that we actually did, that we used to do some stuff with the sheriff with live ammunition, and luckily nothing ever happened. But as soon as we went to not practicing with live ammunition, that helped our rates. So our biggest problem with all of these things is that it seems like, I think the world has gone to suing for deep pockets, and they look for everything, and they think that the government will come to, because that's the biggest deep pocket of all. And then they find out that there are limits, there are tort caps, there are certain things, and they don't think that that's fair, but they don't understand and realize it's because all the taxpayers are paying for that, no matter what that is. If it's a county, city, state, or federal, we're all paying for it somewhere.
Excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. So we're going to take a real quick commercial break. We'll be back with our panelists, and we'll have some concluding thoughts. Welcome back to the county seat. So Craig, Darcy, Stan, how about some final thoughts? Craig, let's start with you.
Yeah, I just think the important message for all of the citizens of the state of Utah, and particularly the citizens of our individual counties, is that litigation costs are real. There are real increasing trends, not necessarily in the frequency, but in the amount of awards that are being given to plaintiffs in lawsuits that are really affecting you and the services that you're able to get and your tax rates. And I look at the organization I represent, the Utah Local Governments Trust. We represent 485 governmental entities across the state, and we see all kinds of claims come through in all kinds of situations and amounts, and it affects your bottom line. And it's important for the governmental entities to make sure their risks are properly covered, and for the citizens to recognize that that it's not a blank check. Litigation that happens against your governmental entity affects your pocketbook, and you need to make sure that your government is doing its job to limit that exposure to risk.
Great thoughts. Darcy.
I think building on what Craig said, we do care very deeply about our residents, and we do want to limit our risks. And that involves training our employees to be very cognizant of safety risks at all times, recognizing that people aren't perfect, but we can all do our best to try to keep our citizens safe. And further to what Craig said, I think it's also important to remember that while there are some inherently risky services that the government has to provide, and I used to represent the Salt Lake County Jail in litigation regularly, and that is a service that needs to be provided, and it is inherently risky in a variety of ways, and there are a lot of liabilities that attend to it. But there are other services that are optional. Rodeos are optional, county fairs are optional, parks and swimming pools are optional, and yet they are all fraught with risk and potential very significant monetary liability. And so being able to impose some limitations, both in how we train our employees to be as safe as humanly possible, but also in state law, so that we can plan for and limit our monetary exposure in the event, God forbid, something goes wrong, because it will at some point, allows us to provide those optional services that make the quality of life in Utah so rich and rewarding for our citizens. And that is something that I think we all take very seriously as public servants, and having immunities and having these limitations in place are a huge part of how we're able to do that.
Excellent thoughts. Commissioner Summers, you get the final word.
Can I just say ditto to what Darcy just said? That's amazing. I learned more from her. We got to get back together where we can actually pull off of what Darcy's experiences have been. So when things like that happen, and she mentioned a few of the things that the counties go through, and with COVID this last year, we ended up not doing all of our rodeos and all of our things that we were supposed to have done. And some of the citizens didn't understand or realize, and it was a tough communication wise to put things out there of what liability we were talking about. And these indemnity pools do a great job of going through risk management. We have somebody once a year come out and go through our facilities and tell us if we have places where they can slip and fall, or they need a doorknob or a catch, or things like that. And on our roads are the same way. So we do as much as we can to save the taxpayers money. We try to go to all the classes that we can do, but everything costs money. But we sure don't want to have a lawsuit that ends up costing us more taxpayers money. So we appreciate everybody being involved and letting us know about those things. And Sean, other than that, I think Darcy just needs to put out a class on this and have Craig and me come and listen. That'd be great.
Well, very good. What a wonderful panel you've all been today. Thank you so much for your contributions. I hope that you, like me and Commissioner Summers there, learned a lot today from the program. And remember that the government closest to you is the best government that's the most responsive. Be sure to check out the county seat on our various social media platforms. Always look for us on Saturday and Sunday on your favorite TV channel, Channel 4 ABC. That is all for today. Thank you again for watching the county seat. Until next time, have a great weekend.
Thank you for watching the County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.